New York City, late September 2024, the setting for the United Nations Summit of the Future, a gathering of member nations to reinforce and accelerate Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The plan has a broad spectrum and is full of worthy ambition. But behind those deliberately bright and colourful boxes lies a darker theme, a shifting of influence and potentially power towards unelected world bodies. The strategy goes back well into the last century, and pressure is growing, because the goals are far behind targets set at the grand relaunching in 2015.
17 inspiring Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our aim is clear, our mission is possible, and our destination is in our sights.
To end poverty and hunger, address inequality, protect our planet, and build a life of dignity for all.
It appears to be a noble and ambitious program for a perfect world. And who could argue with those aspirations? But critics insist the goals are not what they seem. Alex Newman is a journalist and broadcaster who's been investigating the issue for 15 years. He has his own way of interpreting the rhetoric.
You have to learn to speak what I call UNEs. You have to know what the terms mean if you want to truly understand what is being discussed. When they talk about peacekeeping forces or the peacekeeping role of the United Nations, they're actually talking about the war-making capabilities of the United Nations. So you have this Orwellian doublespeak. When they talk about transparency, more often than not, they're talking about eliminating your privacy. Human rights is another very, very good example. They make very clear in this document that your rights can be restricted under the guise of public order or morality or whatever the case may be. And so they're saying, here's your rights, but by the way, they're not really rights. We can revoke them at any time. The UN is filled with contradictions like this. Like, for example, when they talk about gender equality, right? A normal person in the Western world thinks gender equality means a woman has a right to earn money, to own property, to have all the rights and privileges that a man would have. When you look at the individuals who lead this movement within the UN, you're talking about radical feminists. You're talking about people who are very interested in dissolving the nuclear family. As you dig into these goals, it's very clear we're dealing with something far more nefarious. Once you look past the marketing slogans, the kind of warm and fuzzy, we're going to end hunger, which again is just window dressing, you realize that this is actually a blank check for totalitarian global control.
Author and campaigner, the late Rosa Koire, called out the plan more than a decade ago.
It is the biggest public relations scam in the history of the world. But it's far more than that. It's a blueprint. It is the action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all information, all energy, all means of production, and all human beings in the world.
What can be measured can be managed and ultimately monetized. In fact, a study at Yale University has calculated that the natural assets of the world are worth $5 quadrillion. Is this the basis of the new world monetary system? And is it the deep underlying reason for the United Nations project to rewild 50% of the Earth by 2050?
They talk a lot about biodiversity. They want you to think of like, oh, we're going to preserve the toucans and the parrots and the lizards. But when you actually dig into this, what they're talking about is creating, and they're working on it now, an international database with virtually all of the genetic material of all of the species on the planet. And then they want to start mixing and matching it. Bill Gates, ultimately, and his buddies want to end up in total control over all life on the planet.
Is it a coincidence, then, that Bill Gates has become the largest private landowner in America while planning to build smart cities in which to corral the general population? What is indisputable is that the oligarchs of global business are embedded in United Nations policy.
They don't care about the planet. They care about getting in. Finance goes to where it gets the greatest return. There's a move into the green finance. It's all about profit. It's not about the planet.
This is not conjecture. Under the guise of climate change and net zero, vast fortunes are already being amassed. Take carbon exchange markets. Companies emitting excess carbon dioxide can buy credits from businesses that are carbon negative. But increasingly, many are paying a high price to offset their emissions against land schemes. Grasslands, forests, conservation projects, and so on. Some legitimate, others not so. Either way, the brokers and middlemen get rich, while having no impact on actual carbon emissions. We've also seen the emergence of natural asset companies, whose name says it all.
They identify the asset and then issue shares in that asset out of thin air, essentially. And they can sell it to financial institutions, asset managers, sovereign wealth funds. And then they go public and have an IPO, and that funding is, they say, meant to preserve the natural asset. But elsewhere, they say that their main purpose, like so much else, is to generate profit for shareholders. It has nothing to do with preserving the environment. That is literally just the talking point they think will stick and sell. We're all in it together. We got to save the planet. So let's allow the bankers to create a new racket that makes the natural world collateral.
So if everything in nature is to be traded on financial markets, setting a value on the land we walk on and the air we breathe, why do we, the public, have no say?
There's no route that an ordinary person can take to make a representation to United Nations. So it's fundamentally undemocratic. What it has done is build relationships with billionaires.
Right from the start, the rich and powerful have enjoyed undue influence in the UN's inner sanctum. In fact, the Rockefeller family part-financed its headquarters in Manhattan.
To hand you, Mr. Lee, my father's check.
Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller.
Between them, the Rockefeller family has funded hundreds of organizations and, as a consequence, spread their authority on civil society, institutions, banking, education, and global politics. The Rockefellers always believed in world governance. In the 1950s, their Special Studies Project report declared,
"The UN stands, finally, as a symbol of the world order that will one day be built."
In 1973, David Rockefeller co-founded a non-governmental organization which still carries international power today, the Trilateral Commission. Its stated objectives revived technocracy and in turn planted the seeds of the UN's Sustainable Development Agenda.
They said at the time that they were going to create a new international economic order. It was all over the literature. The goal of the new international economic order was not to get richer in the sense of money. They knew even back then that eventually the fiat currency system of the world was going to disintegrate. So the goal became to actually capture the physical resources of the world. All wealth historically has come out of the ground. They wanted to take away everything that they could possibly take away from the nation states of the world and from private individuals of the world and stuff it into the global common trust where they would administrate it and they would be the ones getting licenses for the resources to turn around and make stuff.
The financial kingpins have long seen themselves as masters of the universe, manipulating global affairs through institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Is Agenda 2030 the defining act for complete control? And how significant was the global response to COVID-19?
As the world builds back from COVID-19, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make investments that will strengthen the economy and improve public health, and fight climate change for generations to come.
One might ask why the UN needs a multi-billionaire finance and media player as a special envoy, or why Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, who called for a new global monetary system, is the UN's special envoy for climate action and finance. And then there's Larry Fink, the boss of BlackRock, the world's largest asset management company. He's a board member of the World Economic Forum, and as we'll see, has driven the UN's goals through investment strategies for the past 20 years. All three are principles of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, a partnership with the UN. With the green economy worth trillions to corporations and investors alike, it's hard not to see a conflict of interests. Are the bankers raising money to achieve United Nations goals? Or are the goals a Trojan horse to change the world's financial control systems? Now consider the events at Jackson Hole, Wyoming in August 2019, only 3 months before the COVID outbreak. It's when Mark Carney delivered his call for change, and BlackRock proposed a new financial mechanism, Going Direct, which in principle allows central banks to channel capital direct to large corporations.
So the central bankers got together in 2019, the G7 central bankers, and voted on the Going Direct Reset. And the Going Direct Reset, of which the COVID operation was part of it, has done a phenomenally excellent job of massively consolidating capital into central control. If you look at the COVID operation from a financial standpoint, it was absolutely clear that it was one way you balance the books. It worked.
The major corporations like Amazon and others were allowed to continue business. Meanwhile, other businesses, particularly small and medium-sized entities, were deemed to be, quote, inessential. Many of them were put out of business. And so what we saw was a global wealth transfer of a reported $3.3 trillion from the working classes and the middle classes to this kind of super rich billionaire brigade.
The people who ran the operation made an absolute fortune. It was economically, as a taking, it was a huge taking.
And that included billions of pounds of taxpayers' money going to pharmaceutical firms for so-called vaccines. Whatever the truth around COVID, Dr. Hughes says the response deployed dangerous elements of social control, what he calls weaponized deception.
We see techniques of shock and awe being applied through the lockdowns, techniques of isolation, making reality seem strange and threatening. All of this helps to depattern the mind. These are all well-known military tactics.
Look them in the eyes and tell them you're doing all you can to stop the spread of COVID-19. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
These are, in fact, very nasty and very vicious techniques which were deployed against the public of multiple countries at once. These are forms of serious psychological abuse. I think once the public starts to understand that, there's going to be a very severe pushback against everything that's happened.
The general population cannot fathom the psychopathy of the vision that they're facing. So they can't fathom that a group of people would organize and engineer this kind of mass atrocity to get where they want to go.
Be aware then of the World Health Organization, the UN's most powerful agency. Since COVID, the WHO has sought to increase that power to unprecedented levels through amendments to its pandemic treaty and the international health regulations. A key driver is its One Health initiative.
One Health is a concept that was created to enable the WHO, with these documents, to take over jurisdiction of everything in the world by saying that climate change, animals, plants, water systems, ecosystems are all central to health.
That places the Director General in a key position to influence world events, another potential conflict of interests given the WHO's financial backing, particularly from the pharmaceutical sector. Its accounts for 2022 show that an eye-watering 84% or $3.656 billion of income, came from voluntary donations. The top 4 sources of these donations included the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, a public-private vaccine alliance also heavily supported by Gates.
People see the WHO as a benign organization, and there are still areas where the WHO does useful stuff. But the biggest focus now is purely on a tiny disease burden where investors can extract a large amount of wealth. This has shifted the WHO's focus very much to this emergency agenda, which is very false. Pandemics are very rare events.
This is why we now have a WHO that promotes vaccines all the time, because that's what the money is coming in to support. So instead of being a World Health Organization, we have a World Vaccine Organization, and that seems to be the only thing they're touting.
What's in the treaty has got nothing to do with health. It's a business deal focused on the most profitable business imaginable, pandemic profiteering.
The other part of it, they're setting up a huge surveillance network. We're talking about $31 billion a year. They have to surveil for variants of viruses, and they will find them. They just have to decide there's a threat, not even a real harm.
Experts are preparing for what is known as Disease X, or the next pandemic virus.
They're creating a supranational, self-perpetuating pandemic industry.
The latest scare is monkeypox, renamed Mpox, a disease highly unlikely to affect the general population. Nevertheless, the WHO has acted.
The emergency committee met and advised me that, in its view, the situation constitutes a public health emergency of international concern.
If you get to declare the emergency and then profit from it, there's a big problem, isn't there?
It's essentially a build-out of big pharma, and the WHO is essentially looking to be their marketing and distribution arm worldwide.
WHO! The people say no! WHO! The people say no!
We're fighting for really the right to own our own lives. We're fighting for that freedom versus a sort of corporate authoritarian structure or medical fascist structure, which is what is clearly interests are trying to impose on us.
Changes to the WHO's regulations are expected to be voted through in the coming months. As we speak, the UK government is fully behind them. Meanwhile, in common with many other global institutions, the WHO tries to silence criticism and dissent, branding it misinformation. The science, it says, is settled.
Digital platforms are being misused to subvert science and spread disinformation and hate to billions of people. This clear and present global threat demands clear and coordinated global action.
I have a little rule of thumb for diagnosing a centralization scam. If we can detect 1, a propagandized global crisis, 2, admitting only global solutions, and 3, with dissenting voices viciously silenced, then we know with absolute certainty that we are dealing with a scam.
Control, dictate, eliminate debate, the hallmarks of a totalitarian regime. And nowhere is the cold ambition of corporate dominance more evident than with the World Economic Forum,